and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode from Rare Petro of the Industry Leaders Spotlight. Now, I believe this should be our 7th episode. I'll correct that if I'm wrong. Maybe 8th. Who knows? We've got lots of great people coming in and lots of great content, so make sure you go to rarepetro.com. Look for Rare Petro Industry Leaders Spotlight on YouTube. Plenty of resources. But today, I am joined by a new expert, Mr. Moji Karimi. Welcome to the show, Moji.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So Moji is the co-founder and CEO at Cemvita Factory. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Drilling Engineering and a Master's of Petroleum Engineering, and his experiences range from drilling advanced deepwater drilling methods to novel biotechnologies with applications in the energy and space industry, and that is actually what I'd like to talk about today. Can you tell us a little bit about Cemvita Factory?
Sure. Yes, Cemvita Factory is a company. It's a CO2 utilization platform. Basically, we have through a different portfolio of technologies, which we'll talk about today, using CO2 as a feedstock instead of a waste or liability, and then converting that into chemicals that have use cases across different industries. The initial reaction that kind of made this whole thing happen was photosynthesis. Just like in nature, you go from CO2 and sunlight and water to sugar and oxygen. So we figured out a way to mimic that system, like to build an artificial system that does the same thing that plants do. And that led us to the space application, and then eventually to heavy industry type applications, which I'll go into in more details here soon.
Perfect. Yeah. And of course, I will include whatever resources we need to reach Cemvita Factory. Put a link here. I'll put some stuff down in the description of this video. And if you're listening to the podcast, you'll have to go to rarepetro.com to find those resources. But of course, this is Industry Leaders Spotlight. We're here to talk about Moji. So, can you tell me how you got started in oil and gas? I mean, I imagine growing up in Iran's pretty helpful with that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like natural. Also, Iranian parents are kind of like Asian parents. They're like, you want to be a doctor, engineer, lawyer. So for me, I had a bigger interest in engineering, and I looked into a few disciplines like mechanical, electrical, chemical, and I was wanted to kind of have the thing that was more ambitious. And like you said, there is a lot of momentum around oil and gas in Iran, and Ministry of Oil is like such a high regard in in the eyes of like young kids, right? So I was drawn to that. And then like you mentioned, my bachelor's degree is in drilling engineering, which is very specific. Like here we don't have that. Like you go to petroleum, but back home for bachelor's you have to choose. Do you want to go drilling, production, or exploration, or reservoir, like from the beginning? And I did some research, and people that I've talked to, they told me drilling is more fun. It's also you make more money because you go to the field, and it's more dynamic. So I chose drilling. And after that, I applied to come to US, and I got a scholarship at the University of Louisiana in Lafayette, and that's where I did my master's. And the rest is history, or as we will talk about today as well.
Yeah, and I imagine you probably didn't start Cemvita Factory as soon as you graduated. So can you tell people kind of what you got into after leaving school?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people would resonate with my story because when you talk about entrepreneurship, you have different back stories, right? And the one that is repeated and we hear a lot about is those who say, I was selling newspapers when I was 5 years old, and I was like, doing all kind of like a small gigs as they kind of built into it. So like the traditional hustlers who then got into startups. For me, it wasn't that way at all. Actually, I thought even all the way to coming to US, I thought if I get a job at Chevron or Schlumberger or something, then I'll be happy. Um, and then once I graduated, I got my first job at a company called Tesco, which was bought out, our division, by Schlumberger. I went to Weatherford, which was that big company that I wanted, right?
Yeah.
To kind of climb up the corporate ladder. But once I was there, and I was learning more about how things actually work, and I wanted to explore more. I got talking with some of the C levels and just kind of taking a step back and see, okay, is this the same thing that I wanted? And I realized that's not what I wanted. I wanted to go in a more of a fast track traction. As you would realize today, I'm very impatient with everything and the timelines specifically. So and that was around the time 2000 kind of 13, 14, where startups were taking off. The software startups were coming to fruition, and we're trying to figure out like what does this mean for oil and gas. I mean, there was this notion that you're going to need a lot of money to start a company in oil and gas, but software kind of broke that down, right? Like, no, you don't. You could actually do that. I mean, you guys are doing some of that too, right?
Definitely.
And so I got to learn more about startups and innovation in heavy industries like oil and gas, and had my initial test case when Weatherford put us in this program that they wanted us to kind of build companies inside Weatherford. So they picked a bunch of us that were more like, I guess, ambitious, and they gave us different ideas that were internal R&D projects. And pretty much said, if you're outside, you have to go do fundraising as a founder, right? To then spend on different resources. We'll just give you the resources. Here's marketing, here's sales, here's operations, here's engineering. Go commercialize this product. And mine was a set point choke for managed pressure drilling in onshore. But through that process, I got more comfortable with commercialization of new technology, taking something from the lab to the field. How do you do that? How do you measure it? How do you do it more efficiently? How to get the stakeholders on board? And I'm like, I could probably do this outside. So then that's what I did, and I'll talk about it. But initially I joined another startup to learn how it works from inside. And once I felt comfortable, so as you could see, this was very kind of systematic, and it took about, about like 5 to 7 years to then start my own.
Yeah. Are you pretty happy that it went down like that? Because a lot of people will go the conventional route where they go back to school, they get an MBA, and then they learn their skills from there. But it sounds like Weatherford really hooked you up with a lot more than just a paycheck.
I think something you said is very important. A lot of people look back and things like, oh, did I make the right decision? Like, but there is, for each of those people, there's like 10 other people who didn't, who just stayed where they're unhappy, or it just not speaking to their core. And that's soul crushing to me, So I always have an appreciation for those who go against the grain, like do something different, even if it fails miserably, like get back on the feet, do something else, they're trying, right? They want to make a change that makes them happy. So that said, like, I think everything happens for a reason. This journey of ups and downs of it has got me to where I am today, and the experiences that I have and everything is because of those. So I wouldn't want to change anything about it. I think in some ways actually it's quite empowering, because some of these dots that now I'm connecting in how we could bring synthetic biology into oil and gas for climate kind of change solutions. It's all related to the whole history, and along with my co-founders as well. But the key is to always keep an open mind to change, even if it's hard. And that's what sets entrepreneurs apart, I guess, in building up the courage to do so.
Definitely. And I want to talk about, like you said, becoming an entrepreneur. So we've talked about a lot of your career, the education, the early stuff, you going, I think I could do this on my own. When was that point? When did that switch flip from you being just an energy professional to an industry leader? What was your first endeavor?
Yeah, for me, it's never like an aha moment or a switch. It's continuous, like just like connecting the dots one by one, like building the puzzle one by one until you see enough of it's like, oh, okay, now I know what this is. So even when I was at Tesco, even when I was at Weatherford, I never was thinking about it as like, this is a job that I'm doing. I've felt like I'm here to make better for this company. And like, what are the areas that we could do that? Like, even then I was thinking as like a founder, like everything depends on this. This has to be successful. and really being invested in whatever I was doing emotionally, like work ethic wise. And so, but when you do that and throughout your career, like, and this is not like any big company versus the other, like all big companies, it's just the nature of it is people who think like that, a lot of times you would find that it's just so hard to stay at a big company and do this day in and day out and be happy. And that's why a lot of people leave and say, okay, well, what else can I do? Oh, wait, I could have started my own. And then I have more control over how we want to set this up and the type of culture that we want to build, and to attract then other people who think the same way. And that's why you see a lot of times small companies come out of nowhere and make a whole industry irrelevant in the course of 10 years, because they're not comfortable. They just wanted to continue to thrive. And I've always had that mindset, no matter what the job is, in the different companies, and I carry that over now to what we do at Cemvita.
Hmm. And then was Cemvita that first startup then, or did you have something even before that?
No, I had kind of two other startups before that. The first one, after the Weatherford experience, was actually this was at the time where we're looking at, the digital was like the big move, right? And production forecasting, building better models than Aries, that doesn't require a lot of kind of deep expertise in the old school tools, and automated production forecasting, asset management. So I started basically along with two of my co-founders at the time, this platform for automated production forecasting. That actually didn't work out eventually, which is often like a lot of times with those first cases, the company did survive though, and then eventually one of the co-founders took it on, and like now they're successful fundraising and like everything. But somewhere along the way, I actually decided to join Biota, which was the second startup, as their BD manager in Houston, and as their first oil and gas employee to go and commercialize this. This was a company that wanted to commercialize DNA sequencing in oil and gas, looking at DNA of microbes in the oil and in the rock as a new data source to be kind of next to geochemistry, petrophysics. So I did that, and actually that was my introduction to biotechnology, because the company was based in San Diego, and I realized, oh wow, like there is a whole tool set of technology that is now available, is de-risked, and is made inexpensive enough that we could bring into other industries. And eventually that led actually to co-founding of Cemvita,
Mm-hmm.
which is synthetic biology, which is the genetic engineering of microbes in the oil and gas industry. So as you could see, this was like a progression of ideas. It wasn't like I have this specific idea that I want to do, and like I'm going to do everything to do this specific thing. It's more systematic, looking at the market, looking at what is available, what is going to work, what is being translated from universities into the field, and how to professionalize basically the commercialization process of it, to provide it as a service to other companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the way you described that. You didn't graduate and go, I'm going to commercialize biotechnology to oil and gas. Like you said, there was stepping stones along the way. And it sounds like it was mostly successful, but then we kind of run into a hiccup that most of us call 2020. How has that been for Cemvita? Has it made business better? Has it actually made you guys turn to different projects? What are you doing?
So actually, we've had bigger hiccups than 2020, believe it or not. Because we're lucky that, with the customers that we have, we didn't have any projects cancel. And we're able to kind of, we had our lab shut down for a while, but we're able to open it back up. But we showed resiliency, in those few months that things were shut down. We kind of switched everything around for the projects, and basically did everything that we could do from home, like the lab experiment designs, a lot of the work around IP that we needed to do
Mm-hmm.
upfront. So when we did eventually go back to the lab, actually we're able to stick with the original timeline of the project. But of course, that's not true about all companies. I mean, it was a double whammy because you have COVID and then price of oil. So for certain companies, your customer base is just like, and there's really not much you could do about it. So for us, because this area that we're in is we help companies reduce their carbon footprint. And as you've seen, that momentum not only has not gone down because of COVID, it is increased like significantly.
Yeah.
All the way to like even every day you see new oil companies coming out with their climate pledges and like want to be net zero 2050 or sooner. And like I say all the time, the CEOs make these pledges, then they'll look back at the business units like, okay, now you guys go make it happen. They're like, well, what do we exactly do? And that's where we want to help them. And we talk to those business units to help them. So even though things were slowed down in some ways, in some other ways, life goes on, and for entrepreneurs, we just have to move things around and make adjustments and keep moving forward, because that's the only thing that you could do.
Definitely, and I'm glad it's working out for Cemvita, but I know they didn't exactly exist around 2016. How do you think this downturn compares to that one?
I think what is different about this one is that it's not just about the price of oil and like competing with other source of energy. This one is compounded by the issue around climate change and low carbon solutions. ESG criteria is a big deal right now, which is basically this investors, the big money like endowments, foundation funds, and they would want to make investments in companies that are sustainable. So oil and gas continuously had gotten to this point where it's like tobacco, right? Like no one wants to touch it.
Yep.
And the way to get out of it is really these companies have to reduce their carbon footprint. And this, whether we had the downturn or not, this would have been there, but the downturn like compounded that. So like it was the survival of the fittest before, but now it's like survival of the fittest,
Yeah.
because you have to find ways to be profitable, but also be sustainable. Like, how do you do that? And that's where at least I believe that the area of carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or CCUS, is such a core thing to any oil and gas company. If they're not doing that today or not thinking about it, they're really rolling the dice on whether they're going to be around in 5, 10, 15 years or not, which is why you see the ones that do care about it are making like massive investments in this area. And that just starts the snowball, right? Because then service companies do it. Like today, it was announced that Baker Hughes bought out Compact, carbon capture company. If you had told someone that Baker Hughes bought a carbon capture company like 5 years ago, they were like, "What? What did they buy? What? Like, what did they do?" But this is now core to what these service companies have to do. And one of them does it, then the others have to follow, because guess what? Their customers are asking them for these solutions, so they have to buy. And then because of that, then you're going to have more startups develop in this area. And this is how it always goes with technology development in oil and gas.
Yeah, so clearly more and more people are looking towards it. Like you said, in a time span of just 5 years, the whole idea of what a company should be developing and investing in changed. Do you think this downturn will change anything else? Maybe, I don't know. I can't speculate anything. What do you think?
Yeah, I think a few other things have changed this time around. One was that I think, for a lot of, especially the old timers in the industry, they say, oh, we've lived through many downturns and this is just another one. And that's true in some cases, but it's not, because we had a lot of people that left oil and gas and they just don't want to come back. They just don't want to go through this again every 4 or 5 years. Especially the other sources of energy are becoming more efficient. And we do have to, it's our responsibility as the industry to take a step back and see, okay, how do we stay relevant? you know? How do we keep our social license to operate while continuing to provide the services and the products that the society wants in 2020 and beyond? And these fundamental questions were not on the table really, in the last downturn. That was more about like, oh, well, this is happening. We need to just like manage our finances and the times will come back, but this time is more complicated. Like society is involved, there is pressure on countries to reduce the carbon footprint, and companies, public companies. And also there is before we didn't have this issue of diversification the same way that we have today. Like now oil companies, I think one by one, they're realizing, wait, are we still an oil company or should we become an energy company? It started from European companies, like, you saw it, like Statoil changed the name to Equinor to get the oil out of there, right? But now you have all the other ones following and adding solar, wind, portfolio to what they have to diversify. And I think that's the right thing to do, next to investing in CCUS. So none of this was there in the last downturn, which is in some ways that's what makes it exciting, because it provides new opportunities for industry professionals to kind of train themselves in these areas and become like energy professionals. As you may already know, like even SPE is considering changing their name to Society of Energy Engineers instead of just petroleum. But this is it's a bigger trend that is happening, I think, and the downturn just kind of accelerated it.
Yeah. And then you also mentioned at one point how there's some people who just said, I don't want any part of it. They've left the industry entirely. Do you have any advice or wisdom for people like my age, or maybe students of petroleum or other energy disciplines, what they can do so that they don't equally become as pessimistic and get burnt out and leave?
I think, it's like when we go to school, you kind of think you know what you want to do, right? And then you get the first job and you're there for, a few years, and then it hits you, right? Like, wait a minute, do I actually like everything that I do here? And you start comparing yourself to others. And on top of that, for those in oil and gas now, there's just a stress about the downturn all the time, right? Especially I think it hits oil and gas people harder, because when things are good, things are good. Like they change their lifestyle and everything, and then it's like, whoa, now it's being threatened again, One thing I would say, and I mean, this is like what I have done too, because remember, I was working for Weatherford. I mean, I'm no different than anybody, right?
Uh-huh.
Is to keep an open mind in learning new things, even if others don't still believe in it or don't think that's going to become mainstream. To really take time to learn those things and become experts in them as much as you can. I mean, right now, for those in oil and gas, you could learn about energy, you could learn about, solar, you could learn about wind, you could learn about geothermal. It's right there. It's the same thing, subsurface, You could learn about CCUS, CO2 EOR, sequestration, and that would just make you, one, more marketable to the energy companies of the future who will be needing these things. And also, it's not like before, where even you come out of college, it's not like, well, oh, I need to get an internship with, the BP or Chevron. No, you could now go join a startup from the beginning, and knowing those things, even if someone is in the school, like to do their thesis on these practical things that speak to the future, it just makes them more marketable. And then I know for themselves too, eventually, if they want to start a company or whatnot. So there's a lot more options on the table, even though people think like it's now more limiting. It's not. It's just like depending on how you receive it.
Definitely. And that's something that a lot of people on this show have said. I mean, you got to keep learning, and what better way to go to either Cemvita, see what they can do, or revpetro.com. Again, I'll put those links there. Plenty of resources. We got to continue to learn, continue to develop. But I've got one more question. It's a little bit more on the technical side, because really I'm curious more about what Cemvita does. Do you ever get into disagreements involved with, do you ever get into disagreements with those who work in ethane cracking? Because I imagine taking CO2 as a feedstock kind of flips the script and probably threatens some companies. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so maybe let me provide some context for this. One of the pathways that we've been working on is this pathway to use flue gas from, let's say, cogen power plant, and then convert that into ethylene. And ethylene, people from downstream know more about it than upstream, right? Because upstream, we don't care. We just drill, there's a pipeline, and then we're out, right?
Yep.
And onto the next rig. But a lot of that natural gas and ethane, like you said, is used to then make ethylene. And then ethylene is a huge precursor for polymers and plastics, right? So that process of ethane cracking is very energy intensive. And with our method, you could actually have engineered microbes, the same ones kind of similar to what is done in fermentation, to make ethanol from corn or from, sugar, or like in breweries, right? Fermentation, it's not new, right? But now you could use these engineered microbes to convert that CO2 into ethylene. Now, when you go talk to existing kind of ethylene producers, they actually welcome ideas like this because things are changing for them too. Let me explain that. So let's say right now, there are a lot of consumers that if they're buying, let's say, this mouse, right? They're saying, I want to know the carbon footprint that went into making this. Like they say, carbon is the new calorie, right? So what does this mean? Well, they want to know this, but someone made this mouse, right? So some bigger company bought, plastic from the plastic producer, and that plastic producer bought the ethylene from the ethylene producer. So now this company is asking the plastic company, hey, what is the carbon footprint of your plastics? And then the plastic company is asking the same thing from the ethylene company. They don't want the others up the chain to dump their carbon footprint on them, right? They want the ones that could take it off from them. So my point is, there is a lot of value in providing carbon negative ethylene. And if you could even make it cheaper, which, the pathway we're working on, actually, techno-economic assessment shows we could produce that 30% cheaper than what they're doing today. And it's carbon negative. So it's a whole new market for them that they're open to, and could explore. And it goes the same thing. Like for them also, it's not just upstream, like downstream also has to reinvent themselves because I get it. Like most of the oil we use for fuel, but we still use a lot of it also for, chemicals like polymers, plastics, right? So they also have to reinvent themselves. And companies like us is part of, how they could do that.
Yeah, and I thought I was maybe throwing you a curveball with that question because it wasn't on the script, but you nailed it. So please, everyone, go to Cemvita Factory. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Make use of their technology. I'll put the links to contact both Moji and the rest of his company in the description of this video, but I think that brings us to the end. Is there anything else you want to say? Any plugs for Cemvita? Anything at all you want to say before we end this podcast?
No, the only thing I would say is, a lot of people in the industry, they kind of they're hearing things about CO2 and CO2 capture and utilization, and is like, you kind of are doing your job and you keep hearing about it until it's like, well, wait a minute, what is this all about? Let me go dig into this. And I highly recommend that everyone in oil and gas to do that. If there are any ways that we could kind of think about turning the model on its head, like using CO2, using methane as feedstock, both on surface or in the subsurface with new technology, I think that's what the industry needs to do. And we'll look forward to working with both, those who want to join us or those who have an application that can work with us, because we all have to do this together to have this, like they say, safe journey across energy transition to the other side. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, of course. So thanks again. Everyone, you heard it here from Moji himself. We need to work together to transition step by step. It's not going to happen fast, but if we can continue working and learning, we'll be A-OK. So more industry leader spotlight episodes on rarepetro.com. Again, I'll include all the contact information for Cemvita and Moji in the description of the video. Nothing too personal, just emails, of course, and LinkedIn links. But thanks again for joining us. And until we see you next time, take care, everybody.
Thank you.